Thanks very much, everyone. It's great to see you all here at Flight, and it's great to be here myself. I'm really excited. So, Twitter and the Internet of Things. Now, first of all, in order to talk about this subject, we're going to have to talk a little bit about what I mean when we talk about the Internet of Things. And it's one of those things in the technology industry that often has different definitions. So I'll talk a little bit about my views of that today. And then we'll talk about why Twitter is an important part of it and how it provides context. And then finally, we'll have a little look at how people have been using Twitter APIs and also how Fabric can actually connect with the Internet of Things and Twitter data as well. It's going in the right direction. There we go. So some of you may remember this event last year here in the US in Colorado. There were some terrible floods. And maybe some of you yourselves or your families were affected by them. Now, this is something which is sadly quite common. In the UK, we also have a problem with seasonal flooding at some points in the year. And one of the interesting things about the floods in Colorado last year was that my colleagues at GNIP, our data division, did some analysis of the floods using Twitter data and seeing some interesting correlations about how people were tweeting and around the rainfall and those kind of situations. And you can actually read a really great 4-part series on the GNIP blog about that. But I'm just putting this in here right now to set a little bit of context, because one of the things I'd like to come back to later on this afternoon is how some solutions are being built using Twitter as a platform for flood alerting. So as Katie says, my name is Andy. I'm based over in our London office with Romain, who was also here on the lightning stage earlier. I don't know if any of you in the audience saw his cool talk with the flipping drone and the Fabric app he built. Now, I have a close interest in the Internet of Things, and one of the reasons why I'm here talking about it is that I spent the last 4 or 5 years of my career with different companies, but in particular working on some open source projects with the Eclipse Foundation involved with the Internet of Things, and in particular a lightweight messaging protocol called MQTT, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So I have a little bit of background in this space. Okay, so time for a little bit of definition. Well, I gave a talk in December last year at an event called ThingMonk, which is a slightly strange name. There's an analysis company called RedMonk out of the UK, and also they've got guys over here in the US. And they run a series of different events for developers. They run one in the springtime and also around October time for developers in general. And then this one, ThingMonk, was running last year in December, focusing on the Internet of Things and open source technologies. And they asked me to come and talk about the Internet of Things. And my friend Matt Biddulph, who's here today, a number of years ago gave a great talk that said that it was called It's Made of Messages, that applications increasingly are made from messaging fabrics. You need to be passing messages asynchronously between bits of your applications. And I took inspiration from that talk to come up with this statement: the Internet of Things is made of signals. Now, what do I mean by that? Because, of course, the Internet itself is made of people. And I've gone too far, so let's just take a step back. The Internet itself is made of people. And historically, the web came about because we wanted to start to display information from the web in web browsers. So we came up with this protocol, HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, that let us very easily and totally synchronously get data from a web server into a browser so that we could read a document. And over the years, social networks have come about, the Web 2 era came and went, and we started to bend and break that protocol and change it and start doing things like WebSockets and start doing things like AJAX. And as a result, we have some amazing collaborative tools on the web today which let people interact. And one of the reasons why I would argue the internet and the web have been so successful is because it's such an amazing democratizing technology. But increasingly, we're actually connecting other things to the web, objects and services and sensor devices. And some of those use the same protocols that we're using today with the web, HTTP, and others of them do not. And one of the things that many of those technologies and those objects have in common is that they're simply broadcasting data. They're not waiting for a response. They're not expecting a response. If I'm a sensor on the side of a road measuring air quality, or I'm a sensor in a riverbank measuring the level of the river, and I'm declaring the current status of myself to the web, I'm not expecting anybody to respond and say, oh, that's interesting. It's not a request-response thing. It's a broadcast network, the Internet of Things. Which is why I say I believe that the Internet of Things is as much about signals and data as it is about kind of people. Now, Twitter, and excuse me, my accent tends to cause me to say Twitter instead of Twitter. It's always something I'm challenged on when I come into the US. They say to me at the border, where do you work? And I say, Twitter. So I've just come off my flight. And they say, I'm sorry, pardon me? And I say, oh, no, sorry, I'm Twitter. And they'll be like, welcome in. So Twitter is a real-time information network. We've heard today from Dick on the keynote this morning. We believe that Twitter is simply the best place to get real-time information about the things, the people, the services, and the news that matters to you. And if you saw Roman's talk earlier, one of the things he said was that Twitter is the pulse of the planet. We feel like everyone on the planet can interact with Twitter and tell the world what's going on, where they are at any time. So Twitter provides real context for what's happening and what's interesting to you. If you want to boil it down to symbols, many of us here have been Twitter users for a long time, as I have. I joined as a user in 2007. It's the shortest distance between you, your @ handle, your username, and the things that interest you, or the hashtags that you search on and follow, and the people that you follow. And in many cases, those people that you follow are now increasingly brands or objects or services, and I'll talk about some of those in a moment. So how does all of this relate? How does the Internet of Things, this broadcast network, relate to Twitter as a real-time information network? Well, in actual fact, Twitter was born in about 2006. I joined in 2007, and this little guy here, Botanical's plant sensor, was actually first hooked up to Twitter in 2008. So many objects tweet, and they have been doing so for quite a long time now. This one's kind of fun, I remember when the story first broke on Mashable or TechCrunch or whichever blog it was, hey, these crazy guys have created this sensor which lets their plants tweet about when they need watering. Because like any good geek, I don't want to be doing the gardening and having to figure out, when I need to be giving my plants attention. I just want to be told. So from plants then to ferries, and this is another really interesting story, I think. A number of years ago, I worked at a company called IBM. You may have heard of them. They're kind of big in technology, I believe. And one of my friends there is a guy called Dr. Andy Stanford Clark. He's one of their distinguished engineers. And he actually lives on an island just off the south coast of England. Now, please bear with me. I know that not all of you will be familiar with the geography of the UK, much as if you asked me where Iowa was, I probably wouldn't get my finger in the right spot on the map. So if you imagine the south coast of the UK, draw a line directly through it. In the center of that, there's a little island called the Isle of Wight, and Andy lives on the south coast of that island. And every day, he would have to get to work on the mainland. So he would get in his car, and he would drive from the south coast of the island to the north coast of the island. And he used to use, 2008, 2009, he used to use this thing called the telephone to call like this number. And they would there'd be a message that told him whether the ferries were running. It's kind of weird, I know, it's crazy really. And he would invariably wake up at 6 in the morning, phone the number, and a friendly man would tell him that indeed the ferries were running today. So he would get in his car and drive, only to discover that the north side of the island was clouded in thick fog, and there were no ferries running. How did this technological disaster occur? Well, the human being that recorded the message saying, yes, the ferries are running fine, left the office at 6 p.m. the previous day and didn't get into work until 9 a.m. the following day. Therefore, there was a significant problem. So Andy sat in the car park one day at the ferry terminal, and as a Perl hacker, every hacker's got to know a little bit of Perl, and then hopefully forget it in a hurry. He sat down, he wrote a Perl script, he actually scraped the locations of all the ferries in the channel and where they were in relation to the ports, and he hooked that script up to Twitter. So he wrote the first Twitter real-time information system for this company called Red Funnel Ferries. And a little bit later, he went to Red Funnel Ferries' website and discovered that they'd used our Twitter for Web widgets to embed that Twitter feed into their website. And he realized that it was his Twitter feed. This was not something they were providing. So he called them up. In fact, I think he emailed them, because, telephones, so, last century, and said, oh, I love your Twitter feed. Where's all this information coming from? And he never heard back. Now, this happened to be on April the 1st, and he had the keys to the Twitter account. So the next thing he decided to do was to play a trick on them. Now, again, forgive me, geography of the UK coming up here. There is a town called Milton Keynes in England. It is kind of in the middle of the country, nowhere near the coast. And he tweeted on behalf of the ferry that it was leaving Milton Keynes as an April Fool. And then he sent the ferry company an email and said, by the way, have you spotted you've got a bit of a problem here? And they said, hey, we should talk. And now all of the ferry companies in the UK have these accounts, right? I mean, it's just a normal way of monitoring your transport. And in fact, if you're using the Citymapper app, Citymapper is one of our partners. They're based in London. I've been working with them for a few months now with our Fabric SDK, and they are now bringing tweets about traffic information into their app. You can download it right now if you live in the Bay Area, Boston, New York, some other US cities they're present in, and you can actually find out the status of the BART and the Muni in San Francisco. It's amazing. It's fantastic, because that's how that information is being shared today online. So Andy then is the man here on the left-hand side of the slide. He also, back in about 2009, this piece was written, decided to instrument his whole house so that he'd know when the gate was open, the lights were on, how much energy was being used, when his mouse traps in his loft had been triggered. They triggered a mouse event. Very good. To let him know that he needed to send his son into the loft to change the mouse traps. And of course, more recently, some of you may be familiar with this story, the House of Coates here in the Bay Area. My friend Tom Coates has got a house which is doing something similar on Twitter as well. Andy's Andy house at one stage had more Twitter followers than he did, until his wife pointed out that maybe it wasn't a good idea to tweet about when nobody was at home. So it's now a private account. The House of Coates is a little bit interesting because it's kind of conversational. One of the things that Tom's tried to do there is to enable people to chat with the house, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. So from houses to sensors, and again, I think this is a topic which will, I'm sure, resonate with many of you here today, particularly if you live on the West Coast. Look how long ago these bots were created. Again, 2009 for the New Zealand earthquake feed, being connected up to Twitter. The San Francisco ones followed quite quickly after that. So Twitter is a great output destination for data from sensors. And to take that one step further, let's go back to my example about flood alerting. I've been with Twitter now for less than a year, but one of the projects that I've been really proud to have played a small part in and to have helped with in a very tiny way, just as a developer advocate working with a partner, is this one. So last year there were floods in the UK during the winter time. Quite serious ones, caused a significant amount of damage in some areas. And so this company, Shoot Hill, worked with the UK Environment Agency, which is one of the government agencies in the UK. And they came to me and the UK Twitter office and said, hey, we've got about 2,000, I think, river sensors all the way through the UK. We'd like to each one of them to have a Twitter account. And I kind of thought, that's a bit crazy. Surely you'd want like one account for each river in the UK? But then I thought about this some more and realized that actually, I'm actually not interested in the River Thames, which runs all the way through Oxford, all the way out to the sea through London. I'm interested in specific points in the River Thames, which are close to places I care about, like, for example, my house. On the background of this is where I live in Kingston upon Thames in England. So I can actually click into one of these sensors in the center of town, and the Environment Agency provides information about the current water levels on these sensors. So what Shoothill did was then connect them up to Twitter, so I can actually follow these individually myself. And the Environment Agency was so pleased with this experiment and the delivery of this project that they've then gone on to actually instrument all the beaches in the UK. So you can now connect to any beach in the UK on Twitter and find out what the current water quality is. So it's a great way of sharing that information to people that are interested and prepared to follow the accounts, or indeed search for that information on Twitter. So as well as being a great place to surface information from sensors, lots of people, of course, have connected objects to Twitter and done some fun things with those. This is an example of something called the Kixel. The pattern on it is supposed to resemble that on a soccer ball with the hexagons. So this is invented by a company in the UK called Uniform Tweets, or Uniform. The Twitter handle is Uniform Tweets. And this glows in different colors depending on the sentiment around your local football team or the one that you care about. It's a little bit similar in some senses to Jonathan Cipriano's nice visualization on our Twitter dev stand there, showing sentiment analysis on a globe. But in this case, it's very, very specific to a topic, and it's represented just by this simple, glanceable object. So I've just brought together a few vines, showing some other examples here. We love Vine, and you really don't need to do much more than 6 seconds to get an idea of how these devices are connecting and what they're doing. We've got some Arduinos. Arduinos, for those of you that are not familiar, are very small prototyping boards with very limited memory and processing power, but you can often connect with them over Ethernet or Wi-Fi. We've got a Twitter streaming API example here as well. I love this one on the left-hand side. This is my colleague Joanna Geary. She's our head of news at Twitter in our office in the UK. And she actually has a little ceramic bird that lights up when she's mentioned on Twitter on her desk. So she doesn't always have to have her Twitter feed open, although being a journalist, she's always on TweetDeck anyway. And then finally, some people think of drones as kind of Internet of Things kind of technologies. They're potentially connected devices, as Roman showed earlier. So back in Cannes Lions this year in France, we launched our first dronies in conjunction with Vine. So we can now take kind of animated video selfies and post them onto Vine, which is kind of cool. So to sum up this section then, Twitter is a really great channel for both input and output for the Internet of Things, in my opinion. Okay? Here's an example we're probably all familiar with, and this is a couple of slides from my great friend Sylvain, and he was doing a talk a little while ago about how you might want to integrate Twitter into your transport solution. So if we start to think of ourselves as Twitter users as sensors in a human sensor network, people start to talk about a location of interest, like the Golden Gate Bridge, and you start to detect in your application that actually there's a lot of disruption around it. So maybe your new cool transport app you guys are going to go away and build today using Fabric can actually make intelligent decisions based on the information you guys see on Twitter. Equally, you might decide, rather than looking at everyone on Twitter, I might want to look at what I'm tweeting. Where is Andy? Is he in San Francisco? Is he in Oakland? What's going on? Based on the fact that maybe I've spent more of my week in Oakland than I have in the city, maybe that I want my Uber to come to me to go to the Oakland airport instead. So I'm sure that many of you can see, and those of you that came to the keynote this morning can imagine some of the really cool things you can do now with Fabric. Because we've made it easier than ever to start to take Twitter data into mobile apps. Previously, you've had to do all the OAuth stuff. You've had to use lots of third-party libraries. You've had to build a lot of stuff yourselves just to display tweets in your app or to parse the tweets into your application. And Fabric makes that so much easier. It's really, really cool. In fact, Andrew Noonan, who's going to be speaking a little bit later on, has got some really nice examples as well. So let's have a quick look at a demo before I finish off today. And first of all, I'm going to show you this. Now, this is an Arduino. The bottom part is a battery pack. your common or garden mobile battery pack. Everybody needs one. You're all going to run out of battery before the end of this conference. So we have an Arduino Uno on top of this, and then on top of this we have another shield, which is called the One Shield. It enables the Arduino to connect to an Android phone or an Android and iOS phone over Bluetooth and take advantage of all the sensors that are actually on that phone. So I don't have to connect sensors directly to the Arduino. I don't have a load of additional wires here. Now here's a demo which I'm not going to run through. I will plug this in just so you can see it works. It will blink at you and start showing off. But the demo I've shown before with this, which is not going to work today for several reasons, looks a bit like this. So we start off by initializing the shield and setting up a space for a tweet, 140 characters for a tweet. And then we connect to the shield itself. And at that point, we start asking the phone, what's the current volume? And if the volume that the phone detects goes above a certain level, we're going to simply send the tweet and post what's going on. Now, I'm not going to actually show you that one today, partly because before I came to the event, I didn't know how much noise there would be. And obviously, in an environment like this, it's kind of a bit tricky. The other thing, though, is that this is cheating. This device is not tweeting. In fact, really, this device is just a trigger. This device is connecting to the microphone on my phone, getting information back from the microphone about how loud it is, and then triggering through Bluetooth the Twitter app on my phone to tweet for me. Now, actually, this is very, very common. If you're building this kind of thing with a small embedded device, you're very often not going to find a device which has got the memory capacity or the ability to do complex things like OAuth, okay? So what I'm going to show you instead is something else. Quite often, that kind of device, you would absolutely still connect to the Internet of Things, but you may indeed want to use a proxy, and that's what we're going to do in this example next. Let me just mirror my display so we can see what we're doing in both places, and then everything will become clear. Amazing. All right, so what I have instead is this device here. This is a Raspberry Pi computer. They cost about $35 or $40. For those of you who haven't come across them, you can buy them in places like Radio Shack and other suppliers. And on top of this, I have a board which is connected to it, which has got a bunch of sensors attached. So temperature, air quality, carbon monoxide. It's got a microphone. It's got a light level sensor, and so on. And this, with the luck and will of the gods, is connected to the conference Wi-Fi. Now, a Raspberry Pi computer is a full Linux computer. And in fact, I could easily tweet directly from that computer. But I'm not going to do that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use that protocol that I talked about before, which is called MQTT, to publish the information. So I'm going to just start up the software for this. And after about 15 seconds of calibration runs, hopefully this little guy is going to start posting information to a broker for me. Let me just not do that for a moment. And what we should find, this is using just a command line tool for that same protocol, is that we start to publish every 15 seconds, so there may be a short delay, information about the air quality. If you'd all like to pray with me now, there we go, perfect. So we've got some information from these sensors. In fact, I've got 2 temperature sensors there, which are reporting very slightly different values. I've got some ridiculously long numbers for pressure and so on. I happen to know that the pressure is in pascals, but some of the other things I might need to know more about the values that I'm actually getting. And really, if I was to tweet that information now on a Twitter account, it wouldn't look very pretty. Just to step into what I've done there then, I made a Twitter app. I registered it on apps.twitter.com under my FlightPi account. Obviously, I needed to set my permissions to be read and write, because I'm going to be posting tweets here, not just reading tweets. In fact, I'm not going to read tweets at all. I generated my key and access token, my consumer key and my access token, and then I plugged them into that Python code, which is publishing from there. Now let's get on to the bit where we proxy that. So there's a really nice piece of software, if you're into the Internet of Things, called Node-RED. It's written in Node, as you may not be surprised to hear. And it's basically a tool for wiring different sources on the Internet of Things. And this is what it looks like. Let me just refresh this page, because I've only just restarted the server. And I've got two flows here. This one here is listening for tweets. So this is an input for a Twitter on the left-hand side. And then it's writing them to a file. It's not at all related to the demo I'm showing you now. This is the one that we're looking at. We're listening to those messages I've just shown you. And then, as those individual messages come in from those individual sensors, using JavaScript, it's pretty ugly, as JavaScript sometimes can be, I'm parsing each value and putting it into a tweet. And then I'm telling it to tweet no more than 10 times an hour, so I'm not going to bust any limits. And hopefully we'll see right here that 35 seconds ago, we actually tweeted from our Pi through that proxy node red the current information about what's going on here. So this is just a simple example. One of the other things I could do with that same technology is to actually wire up all kinds of different inputs. So I could actually take tweets as well as messages and pull them all in together and munge them all together into a single tweet. Or I could do sentiment analysis, much as we were talking about with the Golden Gate Bridge, on tweet data coming through there. And there's very little coding involved, because the great third-party libraries that people have built are part of our solution there. OK, so a couple last points. If you want to do this kind of thing yourselves, you're going to want to pay attention to a couple of our web pages. One of them is our automation best practices, because generally if we start firing lots and lots of data that looks very similar at Twitter across many, many accounts, you're going to get suspended by our bots, which are doing automated spam detection. We've got some great resources that Andrew will talk about in his talk later on about the Twitter Developers Toolbox, where you can come and talk to us and check out our APIs. With that, I hope that's been very interesting and helpful to you. I'll be around for the rest of today, and I'll be delighted to take any questions. Thank you.